Samuel had died, and all of Israel mourned him and buried him in Ramah, his hometown. Saul had banned all the mediums and diviners, the wizards, from the land. Now the Philistines assembled their armies, and they advanced to camp at Shunem. Saul gathered Israel's army, and they camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was so afraid. His heart beat wildly. When Saul inquired upon the Lord didn't answer. Not by dreams, not by Urim, not by the prophets. So Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who's a medium." I can go and ask her. And his servant said, "There's one in Endor." And so Saul disguised himself. He put on other clothes and he went with two men. They came to the medium by night. He said to her, "Consult a spirit for me. Bring me up the one I request." And the woman said, "Surely you know what Saul has done? How he has banned, cut off the wizards and diviners from the land?" "What are you doing? Are you trying to get me killed?" But Saul swore an oath. "As the Lord lives, you will not get into trouble for this." And so the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" He said, "Bring up Samuel." And when she saw Samuel, she screamed at Saul, You tricked me. You're Saul." And the king said to her, "Don't be afraid. Tell me what you see." She said, I see a God coming up from the ground." He said, "What does he look like?" She said, an old man is coming up. He's wrapped in a robe." And then Saul knew it was Samuel. And he bowed low out of respect, nose to the ground. And Samuel said, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul said, "I'm in deep trouble. The Philistines are at war with me. God answers me no more, not by dreams or by prophets. So I summoned you here to tell me what I should do." And Samuel said, "Why are you asking me? Why has the Lord turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you exactly what he spoke through me. God has ripped away the empire from you and given it to your friend David, because you didn't listen to the voice of God, because you didn't carry out God's fierce anger against Amalek. The Lord has done this thing to you today. Moreover, the Lord will take Israel and you and deliver you into the hands of the Philistines. This time tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. And the Lord will hand the armies of Israel over to the Philistines." Immediately, Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of Samuel's words. And there was no strength in him. He hadn't eaten anything all day and all night. Then the medium, the woman, approached him. And seeing how scared he was, she said, "Listen, your servant has obeyed you. I risked my life and did what you told me to do. Yeah? Now it's your turn to listen to me, your servant. Let me give you a bit of food. You can eat it and have strength to go on your way. Saul refused. He said, I can't eat. But his servants, along with the medium, urged him. So he did. He got up off the ground and sat on the couch. Now, this witch had a fatted calf in the house. And she immediately slaughtered it, and she took flour and kneaded it, and she baked unleavened bread, and she served this to Saul and his servants. And they ate, and they rose, and they went away in the night.
So this week's story is sometimes called The Witch of Endor, and Jason told that. We say whatever you want to say more about that.
It's an interesting story, right? And we don't often focus on Saul. And so it's an interesting kind of intimate portrait, and I feel like there's a whole communion at the center of it, of this, she feeds, the medium feeds Saul, and so it's just like, we start off and he's disconnected from God, and then he brings up a newly dead Samuel, and Samuel doesn't make him feel any better either, and so he's fully, and she's the one person who's like, hey, I'm still here, I'm with you, I haven't left you. Let me help you out. I mean, so it's she's not unlike a Jesus character in this, and I find that fascinating. It's another unnamed woman that does incredible things, and sort of moves the story along. And this is at the end of Saul's life. He only has a day left to live, and so I just find it very enigmatic. And the amount of time the narrator spends with this story. You know? I mean, and especially that he asks for Saul. Like, the story sets us up that, like, so he's banned all the mediums from the land, and then he needs one. He desperately needs a medium. Okay, so it's like already there's just this tension. And just personally, I know what it's like to go for a couple days without eating, and it's incredibly weak and debilitating. And so I don't know. I felt connected as a teller, and it just made me think more about why we tell this story and why it's there.
I'm struck with lots of these king stories we'll be visiting. There's not like a clear moral. It's just like, yeah, that was life, right? People did stupid things, people did compassionate things, things went wrong, things went better, people ate. It's just like, this is what life is like. There's not a clear,
right,
like at the end you can't say, and the moral of this story is...
Right. There's nothing prescriptive here, right? I mean, it's all just describing the realities of that time. I agree with you. Yeah.
I was thinking of the word wizard that jumped right out at me because I know that some people read that, if they read that word in the Bible, that they see a prohibition against wizards, and so there are book burnings of Harry Potter books and of Lord of the Rings. I mean, any popular works that have wizards in them. So it's interesting, as you say, that that wizards were forbidden, and then they were essential.
Yeah, right.
And to kind of remember what was actually being forbidden, and I don't know that I can even answer that question because I haven't looked at it, but I imagine it has to do perhaps with priorities and idolatry, that you're not trusting in a medium or the spirits in general more than you're trusting in God. I don't really know what that
communing with the dead.
Yeah.
That's probably frowned upon.
And yet in the story, like, God isn't connected with Saul. So, like, what is he supposed to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, he's trying, he needs help, and Samuel's dead too, right? That's how the story starts. Samuel had died, and all of Israel mourned him, and so it's like we're setting up for Saul gets the crap kicked out of him in the story, and just in general when we're talking about Saul, especially once David shows up, there's just Saul is not the hero of any story that we tell. And here, I feel really bad for him.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's been about 10 chapters ago or so already in the middle of 1 Samuel that Saul takes things into he wants to be a king in his own way, and so he takes things into his own hands and does not do what God tells him to do, and God removes God's spirit from him, and that's when all the trouble starts. But David has been anointed, but he's not the king yet, which, I mean, there's never a clear time about when that transition is supposed to happen or how. And so in this story, it's like Saul still doesn't get that God has unchosen him. God has disowned him, but still left him on the throne. So he's kind of powerless to be the king that God has chosen without God's power to help him be the king. It's kind of a double bind that he's in here.
Yeah, and he's leveraging that power to get what he wants out of the medium, to bring up Samuel. But then it's almost immediately like, be careful what you wish for. Like, he's not. Right. After this conversation with Samuel, he falls, he drops full length on the ground. An interesting description. And, and then he's near death. He's weak. He can't get up. And and so it's interesting. He doesn't have the power from God anymore, but he still has power on the throne for what it's worth. And yet, that's an interesting.
What is it worth? Yeah. Well, I think that Samuel's role with the king was to help them interpret what God wanted them to do. Saul didn't do it. Saul already knows all of these things, but are there no other wise people alive in the world that he could consult with instead of having to raise up? I mean, it's a great story, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense sometimes.
Well, and like Samuel's like, I told you, just remember what I said. You don't have to bring me back.
I was alive,
just remember.
Like, Samuel is a prophet who spoke truth in life, as we know, and then apparently in death too. He speaks the same truth, And then he's just like, and he says, like, this time tomorrow, you're here with me. So like you only have a few hours left to live. Yeah. And I feel like if I were Saul, I would have wanted to die that night. And yet she brings, the medium brings him back. And then there's just the whole death of Saul, which is told 3 different times in the Bible, and each time is a little bit different. Oh, yeah. And so it's
in the same book or in different books?
So like it's told twice. It's told at the end of 1 Samuel, and then it's retold to David at the beginning of 2 Samuel, and it's a different story. Okay. And then it's told in 1 Chronicles or 2 Chronicles, and it's similar, and yet it's just a little bit different. But I mean, there's obviously a lot of focus. Saul is an important person in this narrative, in the biblical narrative. Yeah. And it's just an interesting way, because like, how are we supposed to feel about it? To your point, Phil, it's not giving us a very specific way. Here's how to feel about Saul. In some ways, I think that makes it a more interesting story, because there's not an easy answer. Right. Mm-hmm.
He must have had some influence, because like Paul is named Saul in the New Testament, so like people still name their kids after him. He's not like Adolf or
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or Judas. Yeah.
Or Judas, yeah. Mm-hmm. There probably are Adolfs now that I think about it. But.
Yeah. But I'm just kind of fascinated by that mention of David. I feel like that has some weight to it, and I think Samuel knew what he was doing, and that can only make Saul feel horrible. Right? And yet Saul had demons at the that's an early way that Saul and David connect, is David's able to play away the demons from his mind, which is another way that honestly I connect with Saul. He has demons. His brain is not well.
Yeah. And Saul cannot get away from David. I mean, there's no place he can go. There's lots of stories about the two of them like kind of circling around each other and threatening each other and just missing each other and being, all the secret signals to stay out of the same place so they don't hurt each other, and
ships passing
they just can't get apart from each other. And even now, when Saul is thinking, okay, I can have Samuel to myself and I don't have to he's oh, he talks about David
Right.
again. So
Right.
there's just no getting away from him.
Right.
And of course, a thing in the larger part of the story is one of the sons that will be killed tomorrow with Saul is Jonathan.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Oh, yeah.
David's best friend, Jonathan, who many times has helped David escape from his father who was trying to kill him. So I mean, just the intertwined
Yeah, I mean, they must
of
have
all these families, or these two families are just,
fully.
yeah.
Best friend is almost not strong enough
Right,
for how
right.
they're
He
connected.
loved her
Right.
more than a woman.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like there's
Yeah.
I didn't think
Yeah.
about that. Jonathan's death is gonna
Right.
die. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did when do you think she knows that it's Saul, the medium?
I think she knows right away. And then it's this weird back and forth. Then it's like when she sees Samuel, she screams at Saul. She's like, she knows everything. Here's Samuel. This guy is the king who banned everything and now is making me do it.
Right.
But then there's like this whole, but okay, we'll play along for a while. What do you see?
Yeah.
Well, I see a god coming up from the ground.
Yeah.
What does he look like? Well, he looks like an old man
Really?
covered in a robe, and somehow that right. I mean, it's kind of a hazy moment there. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. It's very ambiguous.
Maybe she's leveraging the little power that she has to maybe draw it out, or she sees how much it freaks out Saul.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard some storytellers tell us where they were imagining how the witch herself would tell it, and it was really fascinating. Like they're in the kitchen telling, oh,
Right.
that guy who wanted to destroy us completely from the earth. Let
He
me tell
shows
you
up.
about the time he.
Sure.
Right. And it's not unlike like today. You could have that same kind of sentiment of the witches and mediums and wizards have been banned from the land.
Yeah.
Like that's not unlike how the book burnings you're talking about with Harry Potter. I mean, we
Right.
have this visceral reaction to witches and wizards.
Does it say wizards, or did you add that?
I added that.
Oh, okay, just curious.
Well, she was a witch of Endor,
Yeah.
and so I figured because that's the name of the story, and so I figured I could bring that in, and then I'm like,
Right.
well, then the witch, well, then she had male counterparts, they'd be wizards. Yeah.
I was also thinking of that when he's so hungry that he can hardly move, that fasting is often a way to prepare yourself for a spiritual journey kind of
Right.
thing, or a vision quest. Right? If you want to see
He gets to
things
see.
that you are.
Gets to see God
You get, yeah,
twice.
he's gonna
Once
get to-
through Samuel, and then the
tomorrow
next
he's
day.
going to see God differently. But
Right,
I mean,
right.
kind of the role of denying certain of your senses to try to sharpen others of your
Indeed.
senses. I think that's part of that. That's why he hasn't eaten. It's not that he's depressed and he can't eat. I think he did that on purpose, that he ate, that he fasted.
He wants to hear
to
word.
prepare himself for the vision.
That's good.
It doesn't say
I
that
considered
in the
that.
story anywhere,
Sure.
but that's kind of where
I like
my
that.
mind went.
Well, that's what storytellers do. We need to
Yeah.
try and figure out what those places in between the words are.
Yeah.
That's good. I just felt stressed the entire time telling it, that at the very beginning he calls on God, he sees the armies, there's just it's been going downhill for Saul for a while, and then
Yeah.
God doesn't answer him, and it's just well, if I were him, I wouldn't be able to eat either.
Yeah,
There's no
that
way.
too, yeah.
And then once it gets to a point where she's like, no, get up and eat, get your strength back. At a certain point, even if you're hungry, you get beyond that point, you can't eat.
Yeah.
You're just completely weak. And so I felt some serious connections there. I feel like he was close to death for most of the story.
And in our next story, which I think is divided into two sections because it's really long, you're going to tell this part, I think, is we see that fasting again is a part of penance. That you're not eating as a way to show God that you really are sorry.
Right.
And so that could be part of what he's hoping to win God's favor again by
Right.
doing that. So.
And he was on a first name basis with the Almighty for most of his career, and
Yeah.
from this story until he dies, God doesn't talk to him.
Yeah.
find that very sad.
He's getting ghosted. In more ways than one in this story.
Several ways.
Yeah.
For real.
All right, well, here's a story that maybe you didn't even know was in there, and now you've heard the story. Thanks.